Thank you, Kay, and thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. It's our pleasure to have Mr. Tom Bracken with us today, who's the President and CEO of the New Jersey State Chamber. I'm Megan Hunter. I'm the President and CEO of the Morris County Chamber of Commerce and Economic Development Corporation, and we welcome you virtually to our live seminar this afternoon. We will be hearing from Mr. Bracken for about 20 to 25 minutes. If you have any questions, please feel free to post in the Q&A. We will be tracking them, and Kay Hilling will be monitoring it. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Tom. We also welcome Mike Egginton from the State Chamber as well. So thank you, Michael, for being with us. So Tom Bracken became the New Jersey Chamber of Commerce's president and CEO in February of 2011, taking the reins of the state's business advocacy organization as it celebrated its 100th year. The Skillman resident in Somerset County and former bank executive served as the chairman of the New Jersey Chamber of Commerce's board of directors from 2005 to 2007. He has been involved in the chamber for 4 decades. In 2017, Tom helped establish and become co-chair of Opportunity New Jersey, a coalition of major state business organizations of which the Morris County Chamber is a proud partner, supporting government policies that pave the way for job growth, affordability, and prosperity in the state. In 2014, Tom was named chairman of Forward New Jersey, a coalition promoting investment in the state's transportation infrastructure. And also in 2014, Tom was inducted into the New Jersey Business Hall of Fame. Prior to taking the reins of the state chamber, Bracken served for 40 years in the banking and financial services industry, serving as president of Tri-State Capital Bank's New Jersey operation. He was also president and CEO of Sun Bancorp, and he also held executive positions with First Union Bank and Core States Financial Corporation. He is a former chairman of the Economic Development Corporation of Trenton and of the New Jersey Bankers Association. He's a Bucknell grad and the chairman of the New Jersey Alliance for Action Foundation. He's also a board member for Junior Achievement of New Jersey, the New Jersey Hall of Fame, Public Media New Jersey, Solix, and South Jersey Industries, and Director Emeritus of the Rutgers Cancer Institute of New Jersey. So we're pleased to have Tom with us today, and Tom will be talking about how he is involved with the economic recovery and reopening of the economy. So thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Megan, for that lengthy introduction. It almost is as long as I am old, so you didn't need to say all that, but I do appreciate it. And I really have to start out my comments by saying that the Morris County Chamber, Megan and her predecessor, Paul Boudreau, have been absolutely one of the staunchest allies we've had in the state in all the initiatives we've been endeavoring to accomplish to make the state a better business environment and try to achieve its potential. So I thank Megan for all she's done, and I know we have a lot more to do, and Megan will be right in there with us, and I thank you for that also, Megan. So what I thought I would do today is just talk a little bit about the involvement the state chambers had since the pandemic started about 10, 11 weeks ago, talk about what our strategy was from day one, then kind of morph into where we are right now in the evolution of our recovery and restart status, and then finish with a little bit of information on what we think we are going to do in the future to try to get things moving faster, which is the goal of everybody. So our involvement has been from day one based on one very simple strategy, and that was to provide factual content to all of our members and all of our New Jersey regional chamber partners and local chamber partners, so that all those entities could use the facts that were coming out from the state or the federal government, use those facts to formulate any policies they need to formulate, and any strategies they needed to formulate. And we made a very clear decision up front that we were not going to try to influence decisions of the decision makers in the state, because we knew from past experience that you don't push the governor and his staff and the legislature very hard, because they don't, in a lot of times, appreciate that. So we decided to be additive to the process with facts and not be disruptive or get in the way of the process, because we just felt that was a different strategy. Several other organizations around the state had different strategies, and they have been successful also, but I just articulated what ours was, and I think so far we have been very diligent in following that, and I think a lot of people have gotten a lot of good content and use that content to help them, their own companies, or in the case of the chambers, their members. So the way we've gotten this factual information has been through the involvement that we've had in several key initiatives. One was at one time, the governor's staff had three weekly calls with members of the business community. I believe Megan was part of that group, where we had staff calls with the governor's staff 3 times a week to get updated on what was going on and also give feedback to them. That was very helpful in getting kind of current information as to what the state's strategies were. Secondly, the governor joined a 7-state regional compact with the northeastern states to benefit from each other's ideas and policies, learn from each other, get some buying cooperative power, and try to do things on a regional basis as to working alone. And the chambers of those 7 states got together and formed a similar group to support the governors with the opening strategies, with the recovery strategies. And we've had several meetings that have been very beneficial from a learning standpoint for us, and also passing on information that we have been doing to them, and they've also utilized some of what we're doing in the other states. So that regional compact has also given us some insight into what was going on and helped us formulate strategies. Thirdly, I was honored to be chosen by the United States Chamber of Commerce as the New Jersey representative on their 50-state Restart Coalition, 1 person from each state. We meet on a weekly basis, and it has been invaluable to be part of that group, because I've met people and learned from many, many other states around the country as to what they're doing, which I've been able to pass on to the governor and his staff, some of which has been utilized, some of which hasn't, but at least we've had the benefit of finding out what other states were doing. And I've learned some very good lessons that I will talk to in a minute about what other states are doing that have benefited them, that we need to incorporate here to improve our business climate. So that U.S. Chamber involvement has been extremely helpful for me, for my organization, for the people that we pass on the information to, and I think for the governor's office. And lastly, I was made part of the Restart and Recovery Advisory Group. I'm on the Professional Services Committee that is part of the governor's task force. We've had 3 meetings. Tomorrow's our 4th. And I think that's a very interesting group. The dialogue has been kind of candid. Probably the most candid dialogue of all the committees I'm on comes out of that group, which is interesting. The chair of my committee, it was Zakiya Smith-Ellis, the Secretary of Higher Education, who was just yesterday named as the governor's new Chief Policy Officer. I've gotten to know her, and that's been a great learning experience. So we've also benefited quite a bit in that committee situation, and also provided input to help promote some of what the governor's trying to do from a restart and recovery standpoint. So those are the committees that we've been on that have been very beneficial to gather information and pass on to people. And after having been part of those committees, and even before that, we took a very simple position about what the priorities we thought were for the state of New Jersey to restart and recovery, because they were what we considered gatekeepers before anything could get done in the state, regardless of how detailed any industry had from a opening standpoint, and we kept beating the drum about 3 specific items from day one. We continue to beat that drum. We will continue to beat that drum until they're done, because I don't think, unless the 3 things I'm going to talk about in a second are done, that any business can open safely and any business can survive in the recovery stage. The 3 things we've been harping on religiously are: number 1, the governor or the state needs to mandate safety standards that are based on CDC, OSHA, and the Department of Health standards that every business in the state can comply with. They have to be detailed enough that will make the businesses safe for their customers and their employees, but they can't be too onerous to prevent businesses from actually accomplishing those mandates. So the state needs to do that. That's called what we call prescriptive guidance from a safety standpoint. I think they're not quite there yet, and they have to be there, because the one issue of any business opening that I've heard is we want to do what's right, but we also want to have a safe environment for our customers and our employees. So the safety issue is very big. Incorporated in that safety issue in a very broad umbrella are the issues of PPE, which is the protective equipment that people will need, childcare, which is enormously important for getting the workforce back into businesses because of the issues of children at home, and also the issue of mass transportation. So that is a little far afield from safety, but we lumped all that into the safety issue because they were things that needed to be addressed. Let me just talk just for a second about the PPE. All of you probably know what PPE is. It's the masks, it's the gowns, it's the gloves, all that stuff that's needed for protecting people from others and preventing people from spreading the disease. One of the problems in the state right now is people are having difficulty sourcing PPE, and really when they source it, how good is the quality of the PPE? We made a suggestion based on my US Chamber involvement that other states were doing, which was for the state to buy in the consortium of the 7 state regional group, to buy in bulk and get very preferential pricing on PPE. And in that same process, the product would be vetted from a quality standpoint, and then take that product and sell it to businesses in New Jersey. We thought it was a brilliant idea. I still think it's a brilliant idea, but we've been stonewalled by the state. Their comment is, I think, 2 things. One, they want to make sure the hospitals are fully staffed, or fully, the product is there and enough product is there in the hospitals to be able to accommodate any next phase of this. And secondly, I think they're a little shy about the liability issue, but they can overcome that with some disclaimers if they'd like. So that's just one issue that we proposed on the PPE, and we're not done proposing that. I hope it'll happen, but as of right now, it has not happened. So those 3 things, that's the first thing, safety. The second thing that kind of feeds off the safety issue is liability mitigation. There is an enormous potential for companies to open up and have frivolous lawsuits placed on them by having someone say, I caught the virus in your office, I caught it from your employee, any number of things. And we do know around the country, the lawsuits have been popping up fairly frequently, and there needs to be a safe harbor for companies to be able to shelter themselves from those lawsuits before they can open up with any kind of confidence. And the one criteria that's involved with the federal government, which has this liability mitigation safe harbor stuff in the works right now, it has been passed by the House, is that companies have to follow the mandates that have been placed on them, getting back to my issue about the safety mandates. So that's something that needs to be done. We've also, in our dialogue, said it would be wonderful if the state would promote safe harbors from a liability standpoint, but that is being not dealt with very aggressively. I'm not sure it will. I think a lot of people are afraid of that issue from on the state basis, but it would be wonderful if both the federal and the state government provided safe harbors for companies to even shelter more the potential for these frivolous lawsuits. Those are the first two things. The third thing is by far and away probably the most important from my standpoint, and one that has gotten such little attention that I just don't understand it. And it is the absolute shortage of capital for companies in the recovery stage. We've seen companies in the survival stage, which we're in right now, or we were in, way oversubscribing every federal and state loan program from the standpoint of need. And about 20% of the people who applied for loans federally and statewide, maybe even less than that, were provided funding under those programs, which means that 80% plus of the companies who applied were left at the curb. And a lot of those companies probably will not survive. So it just tells you that in the survival stage, there wasn't enough capital. We're now going to go to the recovery stage, which could be a prolonged recovery. Companies are going to need money for working capital. They're going to need money to buy inventory, to maybe reconfigure physically their offices, to hire people. There's all kinds of financing needs that they're going to have. And the capital is just not there. The state doesn't have the balance sheet to provide loan programs to that magnitude. The EDA does not have the balance sheet to do that. So there has to be, and we can't rely on the federal government, because anybody who has had any experience with the PPP loans knows that they were cumbersome. They've fortunately modified the forgiveness piece, but they were very cumbersome to deal with. And a lot of money in the second round of PPP was left on the table because of all the problems involved with the PPP loans. Plus, they are loans that are shared nationwide. And New Jersey, although we were the second most impacted state from the pandemic, we ranked 10th or 11th in the amount of money we got from those programs. So there's a disconnect there also. So we can't really rely on the federal government to fill the gap. So we've been promoting the issue of finding liquidity in New Jersey that could be tapped to provide loan funds or grant funds to the business community, and try to accommodate as many businesses as possible so that they could have the confidence that they're going to have capital to be able to survive as they rebuild their organizations in the recovery phase. It is a paramount need to recovery, and it's just really unbelievable that it has gotten so little attention, and the things that we've been talking about have not really resonated yet. But this is something that we will continue to beat the drum on. It's starting to get a little bit of traction. I think as people get into recovery, it'll get more traction, but I hope if and when we get to solutions, it's not too little too late. So those three things we've been banging the drum about to make sure people understood that without those three things in place, there could be no assurance of a successful recovery. And a successful recovery is key to the future of our state. So very important things that we have been promoting. We have also promoted every federal program, the CARES Act 1 and 2, the Main Street Lending Program, which is about to come out in a week, the HEROES Act, which is the last piece, or maybe possibly the last stimulus program to come out, which has passed the House and is going to the Senate, which Megan, I think, is going to be pleased to hear that 501c6s stimulus relief is in that bill for 501c6s, which is basically all the chambers of commerce, and we all need some fiscal help. Hopefully that'll stay in the legislation. We've been very prominent in the PPP relaxation, which was passed today by the Senate and is going to the President for signature. We've also been very prominent in promoting the liability mitigation legislation that is in the HEROES Act. And just recently, we have been prominent in trying to promote federal legislation to give the childcare industry more money because that industry is key to recovery. And when they do come back, they're going to probably have their attendance limited, which means their revenue is going to be down, and they're probably also going to have more money to renovate their facilities. So a double hit from a financial standpoint that they're going to need support on, and we've been promoting that at the federal level also. So many things we've been involved with, and all that has given us the ability to provide information and factual information to the marketplace, our members, and the regional chambers. And one of the things that we decided to put out there about 2 or 3 weeks ago was the concept of Buy New Jersey, which simply states that as companies are looking to reconfigure their companies and looking very introspectively at their companies, look at who you're buying from and see if there are companies in New Jersey that you could buy from as opposed to companies in Pennsylvania, New York, Kansas, or wherever you're buying. Because every dollar you buy from a company in New Jersey helps their revenue, which helps their cash flow, which helps the issue of the need for capital going forward. So our Buy New Jersey plan has been out there for a couple of weeks. We're going to be promoting it even more as we go forward. But again, another program that we think will help companies, especially in the capital accumulation area. So that's kind of where we've been and what our strategy's been. Let me just touch on where I think we are right now as a state. First of all, I will give the governor a lot of credit for his handling of the medical crisis. I think he's done a wonderful job. You see the numbers dropping like a rock, and that's great. And he's very determined to take the second worst state impacted down to one of the best from a recovery standpoint. And that's a laudable mission, and he deserves a lot of credit for that. But what we have been complaining about from day one is you can do that at the same time you start to plan for the fiscal recovery. And I don't mean we had to implement things early on, but the planning should have started a long time ago, because there is the potential for the financial crisis to greatly outweigh the medical crisis that we were faced with. And you only have to look at what's happened in 10 weeks. Our economy went from a booming economy to disaster in 10 weeks. That shows how fragile it was. And we have 20% unemployment in the state of New Jersey. As I said, we have only 20% of the companies who needed money getting money. And we're going into the recovery phase with a lot of weaknesses. So I can tell you from my involvement with the U.S. Chamber nationwide task force, we are way behind most states. We are significantly behind our neighbors, Pennsylvania and New York. And I think there are a couple reasons for that. One is that we were the second hardest hit state, and that took a little more to recover from. But probably the thing that has been most telling to me about states around the country that have recovered faster is that the business community has had a stronger working relationship with the governor and the legislature than we have. And Megan knows this, that we've been talking about getting our seat at the table with the governor and the legislature for years. And the fact that we don't have that because of the very strong governor we have and the very strong legislature we have, who both like to act independently, that has prevented us from being further along in this process than we are. We have to take some responsibility for that as a business community, but it is a fact, and I think it's something that if we're going to go forward and recover quickly and try to get back to some kind of economic prosperity, we need to rectify that situation. And it's a very glaring weakness that we have. So that's just a comment on why I think we are where we are versus the other states. If you look at the headlines and read the headlines and hear the governor, you would think that we are catching up because we're now entering phase 2 in some areas. But all that glitters is not gold. When the governor opens things up, following that are the restrictions placed on the companies and the industries that are opening. And today they came out with some of the restrictions on outdoor dining and non-essential retail, and they're fairly restrictive. I mean, they're going to limit comeback, and it's not going to be all roses as people come back, because there are some significant restrictions in place. So we have to understand that even though some of these things are being opened up, it's not opened up in the historic sense. It's opened up in the new normal, or about to be new normal, which is very different than it used to be. I think adding to all this recovery stuff is the governor has very little budge in his mission for the recovery. He announced his recovery plan after my first meeting in the advisory group of the professional services group, which was a little shocking because we all thought we were there for input for him to then formulate his recovery plan. The recovery plan came out after our first meeting. So we were a little confused by that, and that continues to pose some issues as we have our ongoing meetings, and it's made the meetings a little more contentious, I think, than they should be. But he did come out very early on with that, and now he's following through on that. But one of the things missing in the governor's plan was any detail on when the phases would be implemented and when industries within the phases would be allowed to open. And that's an issue that we call prescriptive guidance, which is, we hear you say, Governor, we're not there yet, but what is there? You know, what are we talking about? What are the metrics that are needed for us to meet so that companies can open and the phase 2 can go to phase 3? We would like that guidance. Pennsylvania, New York, many other states have that guidance on a regional basis, and that's why they're opening up in different regions, because companies have met the metrics that were involved. We do not have that in place right now, and we need that, and we continue to talk to the governor and his staff about that. But again, in the spirit of not budging, we have not heard a lot of that prescriptive guidance, and we do need that. Probably one of the most interesting aspects of that is that the governor from day one has had a stay-at-home mandate in place. Our comment, it was, okay, so we have a stay-at-home mandate, but now you can have outdoor dining, you can go to non-essential retail stores, you can have gatherings of 20 or 50 people or whatever it is, but we still have stay-at-home in place. Are you going to lift that? And the answer is no. We still have stay-at-home in place, but you can still go to, use your best judgment. So a lot of states have lifted the stay-at-home, and they've gone to a best judgment kind of philosophy, but the state of New Jersey has not done that. So just one other thing that is kind of confusing, but is something the governor has not budged on. So all that being said, I think that there are many things in our state that are being underestimated from how bad it really is. Nobody's really gauged how bad it is. Anecdotally, we've heard information, but there's been surveys done. Some of the surveys are conflicting. We did a survey that talked about companies were optimistic about coming back, but not optimistic on the timeliness of coming back, meaning there could be an extended recovery period. Now, complicating all that, which is very complicated, I'm talking now about the recovery and a restart process, has been the civil unrest that just popped up over the last week, which has really thrown things into a turmoil and making things a lot more complicated than they were before. Hopefully that'll die down and get out of the way quickly. I don't think it will, but that's been complicating things as we speak. And then the other thing that is going to be an enormous challenge for a business comeback is the state of New Jersey. The state itself has enormous budgetary problems. The Assembly today passed the bonding or the borrowing request of the governor, which allows him to borrow up to, I think, $15 billion, 5 of which is through a general obligation bond, the rest hopefully coming from the federal government. But if the state of New Jersey is not healthy, no matter how well we do our job for helping companies restart and recover, the business community cannot achieve a very successful outcome because the state has so much influence on what the business community does and how successful it is, that if they are weak, we're going to be weak by association. So the issue of the state finances is paramount to helping this whole process work right. And I'm sure the budget battle will be pretty intense going forward, which has just started. I am sure that the borrowing concept will be challenged in court, which will pose some big hurdles for the governor to get funding without cutting essential services. There's just a lot going on that if taken out of context, the recovery and the restart was just addressed individually, I think things could be moved along at a faster pace with more confidence. But with all the other things interjected into that, it makes it much more difficult. But that doesn't mean we have to give up, or that doesn't mean anybody's giving up. I think the key here is we have to find ways to overcome that. We have to find ways to continue to get the messages that I talked about at the forefront and get the issues resolved. We have to continue to work with our congressional delegation to get the HEROES Act passed so that the state gets funding. We get our 501c6s stimulus package in place. There's another piece of that. There's another business stimulus package. It also addresses the liability issue. So we have to continue to work to get that in place to help all the issues I talked about earlier. And probably the HEROES Act, which is the one that just passed the House, could be the very last of these stimulus programs. So it's got to happen. It's got to address those issues, or there's going to be some huge loose ends that are going to prevent the state and probably the country from coming back in any reasonable amount of time. So that's kind of where we are from our perspective. And just let me just touch quickly on what we are going to do. A very simple process on what we're going to do about the civil unrest. And we just put out a press release today about it. One of our board members, and somebody Megan knows well, John Harmon, who is the CEO of the African American Chamber of Commerce in New Jersey, was put on the U.S. Chamber's new task force on inequality opportunity. That's a major initiative by the U.S. Chamber. He's one of 7 people on that task force. We signed on this afternoon to be part of that task force to help with the inequality issue, the racial inequality issue from an economic standpoint. We're going to be working with the U.S. Chamber to promote programs within the state to try to address that issue. So from the standpoint of the unrest and the unrest really dealing with the racial bias issues, we are totally committed to doing something within the state and totally committing to supporting the U.S. Chamber and their initiatives. As far as what we're doing statewide on the recovery and the restart, this afternoon, right after this call, as a matter of fact, we're convening 45 or 50 of the largest chambers in the state, Megan being one of them and one of the first calls we made for this, to bring all the chambers closer together in a working alliance so that we can work with each other, leverage off each other, have each other support each other, have grassroots initiatives dealt with, have statewide initiatives dealt with in a collective way, so that we can have much more clout and get a bigger seat at the table, which I said is absolutely mandatory from my standpoint. And that initiative starts this afternoon. And we're going to talk about how we're going to grow that initiative, which I think will strengthen the business community, strengthen the issues that we have to overcome, and give us a lot more clout, as I said, with the governor and the legislature. It's sort of what our former Opportunity New Jersey coalition was, but a much more targeted, in a much more targeted way to companies or organizations that are like-minded, meaning all the chambers who have a like-minded mission of helping the business community within their geographic purview. So that's something that will start this afternoon, and I think will help this whole process. And with that, Megan, I've probably bored everybody to death, and I'll stop to answer any questions.
Thank you, Tom. That was fabulous. Thank you for your leadership and your advocacy on behalf of the business community. So now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Michael Stanzilis, who's our Vice President of Membership and Business Development, to ask questions that were posed in chat. So if you have additional questions, please post them there. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Tom. You said a lot up front, and you addressed a lot of the questions in advance, but there's some little detail on some of these. So the borrowing legislation that went through, 10 billion and the 5 billion GO bond, apparently they're contemplating a surcharge to property tax bills, which we're already at some of the highest in the country. What is your position on this?
My position on that is, first of all, let's start with the borrowing of the GO bond. I think before we borrow from the GO bond, the state needs to go through what every business is going through right now and see how they can affect efficiencies within government, which means another way of saying cut costs. The state of New Jersey, to my knowledge, there have been no layoffs or no furloughs or no pay cuts for anybody in the state of New Jersey. And I think it's absolutely ludicrous to go ahead with bonding and borrowing, which is going to put that kind of pressure on the citizens and the businesses of New Jersey without, first of all, looking introspectively at how you can cut your costs and keep that down. So that's my first comment. The second comment, to answer your question more directly, Mike, is that I heard the governor say today in his press conference, and that question was asked, and his comment was, he kind of chuckled and said, look, if we don't do this, there's no question we're going to have to increase your property taxes because that's where the money's going to come from. So I think that's a roundabout way of saying there's a strong possibility that that will happen because a GO bond has to be funded. There's no direct funding source for a GO bond. It comes out of the general obligations of the state, of which property taxes play a role. So I think there's no question that that's got to be part of the future unless efficiencies can come where that will not be needed.
Great. Well, that was a great answer. Thank you. The next one has to do with rent, mostly from the landlord side, and particularly the smaller landlords. You know, the small businesses that are in these smaller strip malls that are owned by smaller companies and you know, not the big REITs or anything. But, you know, will there be a rent abatement, or what's your take on that, or rent deferrals? And would the most significant assistance to small businesses require them to be able to overcome this shutdown? This questionnaire is asking what, you know, what can they do to get through on this?
Well, any kind of deferral or abatement of rent, of taxes, of any kind of mandated payments helps with the underlying issue of cash flow, which is the capital issue I talked about. So there's a lot of talk about rent abatements. In some cases, I think there have been some rent abatements. I'm not positive about that. But, you know, the other factor for the retail market is there can be no evictions or foreclosures of people who do not pay their rent. That's been mandated by the governor. So in effect, there is that on the retail side. And on the commercial side, there's been a lot of talk. I don't think it's happened, but it would be a benefit, obviously, to the small businesses who have to pay rent, but there's a ripple effect of that. Then you have the owners of the real estate who don't have income, and that puts pressure on them from servicing the debt that they probably have on those facilities. So no matter what you do, there's a negative ripple effect. And I think there's, you have to weigh these things from the standpoint of the risk reward and the pain factor. And I think that the rent abatement could be very painful as you go down the feeding chain, especially to the owners of properties. And I think it's one of the lesser benefits that could be given to businesses to enhance cash flow.
Yeah, that's great. And not to mention the owners of their property inability to pay their property taxes to the municipalities that they reside in, which has another ripple effect. The other question here, I don't know if you could answer this or not, but the question the person is asking, on June 15th, will the indoor malls be open?
No, in fact, the governor addressed that today too. June 15, the malls will not be open, but he puts that in a category where he puts a lot of things, which is that's something that we will address sooner rather than later. So June 15th will not be malls, no.
I think the June 15th date is outdoor seating for restaurants.
And also non-essential retail, which is basically the main street retail, you know, the retail stores along the main streets of our cities and towns.
Mm-hmm. Here's a great question. It's, when do you expect New Jersey to move into phase 3 or stage 3?
First of all, we need to get people into phase 2. Phase 2 is just the tip of the iceberg with outdoor dining and essential retail. Phase 3, you know, with the direction of the medical data, and, you know, the governor keeps talking about data drives dates. The data is going down very significantly, that in a positive way. Phase 3, I think, which entails indoor dining and a lot of a lot more social confinement, which is the thing that the governor really has a problem with. That's going to be a ways off, in my estimation, because it's very difficult to enforce indoor facilities versus outdoor facilities. So phase 3, some of phase 3 is going to be problematic. There are parts of it, I'm sure, and I'm not sure what all the parts of phase 3 are. There'll probably be some that can be accommodated fairly soon, but overall phase 3 in its entirety, I think, is going to be a while because of the fear of a rebound in the pandemic.
Absolutely, that's a great answer. So I love this next question, and it comes from, I have to announce, we do have Steve Shaw, Deputy Freeholder Director from Morris County, on the call with us. Thank you for being here, Deputy Director. But you alluded to the amount of state employees that are not been looked at from an efficiency standpoint in furloughs. But so bureaucracy and regulatory red tape has always been a big issue for businesses in New Jersey. Did your group look at easing regulation to help businesses with the restart up of getting back out there?
Yeah, there was a movement early on about, in fact, the very first thing that was proposed to the governor was a set of proposals to modify some policies that would ease regulations, one of which was reinstitute the Red Tape Commission that Governor Christie had, which we totally support. So yes, there have been several issues that have been posed like that, but I think in reality, those are things that are kind of secondary to getting us up and running as a business community. Those are kind of tweaking things. We've got to get to a position of health before we can start to tweak, in my estimation. But we have promoted those in the past. We will promote those in the future. But I think right now that those issues really need to take a back seat to the issues of really fully recovering and getting the financial issues resolved.
That's great. So we do have some attorneys on the call, and you had discussed earlier liability for going back into work. And so this question is talking about pressure. Has there been pressure from attorneys around the state in terms of tort reform, or from pressure from the tort lawyers, or to enact liability protection?
To enact liability protection?
I think the question is the reluctance to enact liability protection coming from pressure from the tort lawyers?
I'm sure they're not for it. I can't imagine they would be for that. So I think that I don't know specifically, Mike, of any, but I have to believe that they've made a case why it shouldn't happen, but I don't know what that case is. Just logic tells me that would be part of the mix.
Hey, Tom, I would add too that on the federal level, it's been a battle between the private sector and the unions. I think the unions are, pushing for their various employees. So I would imagine, AFL-CIO and groups like that are involved.
Great, thank you. So, you talked a lot about how the potential for our budget to be just completely decimated here. And this question is, given the budget challenges, do you envision a tax increase next fiscal year?
Well, the interesting thing in the governor's budget that was just proposed is there are no tax increases. Even the infamous millionaire's tax is not on the table, which is something that's probably been proposed in every budget that Governor Murphy's put on the table. They have to have a balanced budget in the state of New Jersey. And once they determine with some confidence what the revenues are going to be and what the borrowings will do to help mitigate the shortfall, you only have a couple of places to go to make the budget balance. And one of those, obviously, is to increase revenues. And probably the logical starting point for that is taxes. And that's always been an issue in the state of New Jersey. And that's always been the thing that we've talked about as the need to become more efficient before you go to tax increases, because what that does is makes the state less competitive, less affordable, and prevents us from generating revenue from a larger base of businesses because they're either leaving or not coming here. So it's always one of the first options when you're looking for revenue enhancements in the state. And I have to believe that, as the governor said, and as the Senate president and the Assembly speaker have said all along, everything is on the table and everything would include tax increases.
Absolutely. I'd like to recognize Morris County Freeholder Director Deb Smith. She's also on the call, and so it's great to have the support of the freeholders on this call and with the business community. And she has a great question, and I think that it really relates back to what you were saying in his budget, is that it's going to trickle back to the municipalities. They're going to get less school aid. They're going to get less money back from the state. So they're going to have to then do what they need to do, either cut back services or raise taxes or both. What is your take on how that could play out?
I think, Mike, just as you said, the state's going to be cutting back on what they give the municipalities. The municipalities, let's not forget that the governor had a proposed budget in place before this hit. And a lot of that included much more revenue for the municipalities and the local governments than they had the prior year. So I'm sure they had already started to make plans to use that money, and now they don't have that money. So that's kind of the real deep wound that's been caused, I'm sure, at the municipal level. And again, they have to find a way to provide essential services, provide for the educational needs of their communities, and they're not going to have the money they thought they had. So again, you go back to what is the primary source of school funding? It's municipal taxes and property taxes. So you just follow the trail of the past, and it comes to some very logical conclusions.
That's great. So we're getting close to wrapping up with closing statements. But you've been talking mostly or 100% about the crisis we're in now, which is on everybody's mind. But where do you see, outside of this crisis, going back to the new normal, where does the state chamber, what's your agenda, or what is on your list of things you'd like to accomplish when we come out on the other side?
Well, obviously the primary thing is to get as many businesses up and running as quickly as possible and getting to a point where they can be self-sustaining, and we can try to get back to somewhere near where we were before. I mean, that goes without saying that that's a primary mission for us. But secondarily, the lesson I have learned from all these involvements, especially with the U.S. Chamber Nationwide Task Force, is we have tried very hard. Megan knows this because she's been part of it. We've tried very, very hard to penetrate the inner circle of the governor's office and the legislature, to be heard more, to have our ideas constructively evaluated. We need to work harder to do that, because the states that have done that have moved ahead a lot faster than we have. The state of Georgia is probably one of the better examples. They have been open for 2 weeks, and it's something that's needed. Government officials in the legislature and the administrative branch have not been open, even going back to other administrations that have not been open to this. We have to work harder. We have to get a seat at the table, because if not, then the issues that we have that go unheard will continue to be there, and that's going to hold us back from a business competitive standpoint. And we cannot afford to lose any more businesses, and we have to work very hard to try to attract more businesses. So, seat at the table and financial health of our members are two primary missions for us.
That's excellent. Thank you, Tom. So Megan, back to you for some closing statements, and then Tom to close it out.
Great. Thank you, Tom. So as we always say on our government affairs committee meetings, your voices are louder than you think. So please call your legislators, stay involved with the chamber, both at the local and the state level, and know that we are here for you. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to give us a call. Thank you for your active participation. And again, thank you, Tom, for being with us today. Thank you, Michael, as well. And thank you, Michael, for fielding the questions.